The village of Ndimu, hidden deep within the red-soiled savannas of West Africa, had always been known for its harmony. Its people lived close to the land, to the rhythms of the rains and harvests. And most importantly, to the voices of the dead. The towering baobab tree at the village's center was not just a landmark, it was a sentinel, a witness to generations of bloodlines, secrets, and sacred oaths made in hushed tones and sealed with offerings beneath its gnarled roots. Among Ndimu's oldest families was the Abadil clan, whose name once meant, "The crown has returned home." They were descendants of great spiritual custodians, seers, diviners, and guardians of ancestral law. For centuries, their lineage had been blessed. Every generation produced at least one child gifted in dream sight or one who could sense the moods of spirits through wind or fire. Crops thrived in their fields. Rain came when they called it. And no one in the family had ever died a violent death. It was as though unseen hands gently guided their fate. But something changed. First, the birds stopped nesting in their trees. Then, infants began dying in the womb. Illness clung to the family like a shadow that would not lift. Some whispered that the land itself recoiled from their touch. Their name, once spoken with reverence, now drew uneasy glances. At first, the Abadil elders believed it was just a turn of bad fortune, a cycle that would pass. But as the signs worsened, they turned to the diviner. An old woman named Mama Ruka, who lived on the edge of the forest. What she uncovered in her trance would send ripples through the village and awaken the memory of a sacred vow. Broken long ago, a vow made under the baobab, in the presence of ancestors, and now desecrated by ignorance and pride. The story that unfolds is not merely about a family's fall from grace. It is about how the past clings to the present, how promises made to the dead are binding, and how the spirits of Africa are neither forgetful nor forgiving. The first sign that something was wrong came with the rains. Or rather, with the lack of them. In Ndimu, the arrival of the rainy season was a sacred rhythm, predictable as breath. Clouds would gather on the fourth new moon after the harvest, and soon after, the air would fill with the scent of petrichor and promise. The Abadil clan, like the generations before them, would perform their annual rain-calling rite, not out of desperation, but tradition. It was believed their ancestors, once powerful guardians of the sky spirits, still watched over them and sent rain when properly invoked. That year, the ritual was led by Elder Kola Abadil, the patriarch of the family and keeper of the sacred staff passed down through 7 generations. He wore the ceremonial cloth dyed in indigo and adorned with cowrie shells. His face marked with white clay in the patterns of the spirits. The whole clan gathered beneath the baobab, drums pounding like thunder, chants rising into the sky. Sacrifices were made, a goat, kola nuts, and palm oil, all placed before the ancestral shrine at the tree's base. But the sky remained dry. For days. Then weeks. The land cracked open in protest, and crops withered. Nearby families began whispering, perhaps the Abadil had angered the spirits. Perhaps the old gods no longer listened to them. Elder Kola refused to believe it. This is a test, he told his children. A season of silence. The ancestors are not angry, only waiting for our hearts to be pure again. But as the drought deepened, misfortune began to take more personal forms. First, a young boy named Tamoa, barely 5 years old, was bitten by a snake while playing near the yam field. Normally, the herbalists of the Abadil clan could cure such things, they had remedies passed down for generations. But the potion failed. Tamoa died that same night, his small body shaking violently. His eyes wide open even in death. Then came the dream. It visited Adaora, Kola's eldest daughter and the most spiritually sensitive among them. In it, she stood in the middle of a dry field. And the baobab tree loomed before her, blackened and leafless. A figure emerged from its base, neither living nor dead, with eyes like embers and skin like ash. It pointed at her silently. Then turned and walked away. When she tried to follow, her feet sank into the earth, and she awoke screaming. She told her father, who grew pale but dismissed it. "It's just a dream," he said. "Too much grief and hunger in your spirit." But he didn't sleep that night. Instead, he went out and sat alone by the baobab until the moon set. The days that followed brought more pain. The family's main grain storage was found infested with insects despite being sealed. And worst of all, Johnny, Kola's only surviving son, was arrested after being accused of stealing from the village treasury. It was unthinkable. Johnny had been raised with discipline and honor. But the evidence was undeniable. Stolen beads of copper and ivory were found buried behind his hut. He was banished from Demu and disappeared into the forest, his name no longer spoken aloud. That night, the village held a secret meeting. They didn't invite the Abadil. The Council of Elders, led by Chief Madhu, debated in low voices whether the family should be cut off from community rituals. "Their misfortune is like rot," said one elder. "It spreads. We cannot let it poison the whole village." But not all were so quick to judge. Mama Ruka, the village diviner, requested to speak. Though old and frail, her voice carried weight. "Before you cast out a family," she said, "you must look to the past. Curses are not born in silence. They are spoken first, by oath, by vow, or by betrayal." Has anyone asked what the Abadil forgot? No one answered. The Abadil themselves, in the grip of shame and fear, began to turn on each other. Accusations spread like wildfire. Kola blamed Adaora for bringing bad spirits through her dreams. Adaora blamed her sister Nena for not keeping the family shrine clean. Nena accused Kola of favoring the dead over the living, and refusing to see that the ancestors had abandoned them. But the truth was darker than any of them guessed. It would take another dream, and a journey into forbidden memory, to uncover the original sin. A sacred vow, made by a long-dead ancestor under the very roots of the baobab tree, had been broken. And the spirits, who forget nothing, had come to collect what was owed. The dream returned. Not to Adaora this time, but to the youngest in the family, a quiet boy named Sei, only 9 years old. He had always been strange, even for an Abadil. While the other children played, Sei often wandered off, talking to insects or sitting for hours under the baobab tree, whispering into the wind. Many in the village believed he was spirit-touched. The kind of child the ancestors marked early for reasons no one fully understood. One night, Sei awoke in tears, his voice hoarse from screaming. His mother, Amina, rushed into his room and found him sitting up, eyes wide with terror. "He was there," the boy whispered. "He called me by name." "Who, child? Who called you?" "The man in the red cloth, with fire in his mouth. He said we forgot. He said we lied." Amina froze. Red cloth. Fire. Those were not images a child invented. They belonged to ritual, to prophecy. She didn't tell her husband. She went straight to Mama Ruka. The old diviner listened in silence, her milky eyes staring into the middle distance as the boy repeated what he had seen. When he finished, she laid a trembling hand on his forehead and spoke a name he had never heard before, Adebola. That, she said to Amina, was the name of the vow-breaker. The one your family buried without truth. The ancestors have not forgotten. Neither should you. Amina returned home that night shaken. She asked Elder Kola about the name. He stiffened, looked away, and said nothing. But the next morning, without a word, he pulled out an old gourd wrapped in faded cloth from beneath the family altar. Inside was a bundle of cowrie shells, a bone pendant, and a fragment of old parchment. Its symbols worn almost illegible. He stared at it for a long time, then called Adaora, Amina, and Sei into the main room. "There is something I must confess," he said, voice low and trembling. "Something my father never should have hidden, and something I have carried in silence, as he did." They sat in silence as he told them the story. Over 100 years ago, during a time of tribal wars and colonial raids, the Abadil family was spared a great massacre. It happened, legend said, because one of their ancestors, Adebola, made a sacred vow to a powerful ancestral spirit. According to the story, the family was on the brink of being wiped out when Adebola went deep into the forest to perform a forbidden ritual. He called upon an Ogban spirit, an ancient, hungry entity bound to the ancestral plane, and offered something it could not refuse, a bloodline promise. In exchange for safety, he vowed that the firstborn of every Abadil generation would serve the spirit for life, as a priest, diviner, or messenger. They would never marry outside the tradition. They would never abandon the rites. And they would never, under any circumstance, burn the shrine. "But we did burn it," Kola whispered, his face gray with guilt. "When I was a young man. My brother Olusegun, he wanted to become a Christian pastor. He said our ways were pagan, evil. One night, he set the old shrine on fire. We thought nothing happened. But since that day, no firstborn in our family has lived past 40. And now, even the secondborns are dying." The room fell into stunned silence. A vow broken. A blood debt unpaid. The family's spiritual pact, made to preserve them, had been desecrated, not by accident, but by choice. Adora stood slowly, her face pale. "Then why didn't you rebuild the shrine? Why didn't you make atonement?" "I tried," Kola said. "I went to the forest, to the old place. But the spirit did not come. The baobab roots had shifted. The path was gone. I thought maybe the spirit had forgotten." "But the spirits don't forget," whispered Sei. "He said so." Amina turned to Kola with anger rising in her eyes. "And you let us raise our children in that curse? You let us pray, perform rites. All for nothing." "I thought it was over," Kola said weakly. "I was wrong." They went that night to Mama Ruka once more. She told them the truth, rebuilding the shrine was not enough. The spirit had been promised something sacred, and betrayed. To restore balance, they would need to return to the forest, find the original site of the vow, and offer a life, either symbolically or in blood. Adora stepped forward, fire in her eyes. "Then we will go. I will find the place. If our family must pay, then let it be me." Mama Ruka studied her for a long time. "No," she said. "It will not be you. It must be the one the spirit called by name. The one who was born with the mark." They turned to Sei. The boy did not cry. "I will go," he said. "He's waiting." The air was still when they left the village. Not silent, for there were birds, and insects, and the distant rustling of leaves, but still in that way that felt unnatural. Like the forest was watching. They had waited for dawn, as advised by Mama Ruka, who told them the boundary between the worlds would be thinnest then. The journey was not long in distance. But old paths are never measured in steps. The place they sought was deeper than maps, older than memory. Sei walked at the front, barefoot, his face painted in white ash and charcoal. A mark of the spirit child. Behind him was Adora, silent and determined. Kola brought up the rear, carrying a calabash of offerings, palm wine, a white rooster, and the last piece of his father's staff, the only relic left from the old shrine. Amina had wanted to join them, but Mama Ruka warned that too many hearts could confuse the spirits. "This is not a place for argument," she had said. "Only truth walks safely in that forest." They passed the old yam fields, now overgrown and swallowed by thickets. Trees twisted in unnatural shapes. their trunks gnarled like clenched fists. As they moved deeper, the sounds of the outside world fell away. The birds grew quiet. Even the insects seemed to vanish. Sei walked without hesitation. Though the path had long disappeared, he moved as if guided by invisible threads. Occasionally, he would pause, touch a tree, and turn a new direction. When Adora asked how he knew the way, he said only, "He's calling. I hear him." After nearly 2 hours, they reached a clearing ringed by stones, black, smooth, and arranged in a spiral. At the center stood the remains of an altar. Crumbled with time, roots weaving through its cracked surface. A single white feather lay atop it, pristine despite the damp earth. Kola fell to his knees. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where Adebola made the vow. This is where we betrayed him." They began the ritual. Adora lit a fire using dried moss and flint. Kola poured the palm wine around the spiral stones. Chanting in the tongue of their ancestors, a language he had not spoken in decades. Sei stood in the center, arms at his sides, eyes closed. His lips moved silently. Echoing words none of them had taught him. The rooster was placed at the altar. Kola raised his knife, trembling. But before he could strike, the wind shifted. It came with a sudden drop in temperature, unnatural and sharp. The fire dimmed. The light itself seemed to bend. And then, they heard the voice. Not loud. Not angry. But deep, so deep it seemed to rise from the very soil. "Who speaks for the broken vow?" Sei opened his eyes. They were no longer the eyes of a child. Amber glowed in them, flickering like flame behind glass. "I do," he said. The wind howled through the clearing, scattering ash and leaves. The trees groaned. And then the spirit came. It did not take a form. Not at first. It was a presence, weight pressing on the chest, a taste of iron in the mouth, a humming in the bones. Then it coalesced in the smoke rising from the fire. A towering figure robed in red mist, its face hidden, but its eyes burning through the veil. One hand was bone, the other shadow. It looked at Kola. "You made the vow," it said. "Then you let your blood betray it." "I didn't know," Kola pleaded. "I was a child. My brother, he destroyed the shrine. I tried to rebuild. Please." The spirit turned to Adora. "You have the sight," it said. "But your heart is not clean. You doubted the old ways. You abandoned the altar." Adora bowed her head. "I did. But I have returned. Lastly." The spirit looked to Sei. "And you? Born under the eclipse. Marked before breath. The price must be paid. You were promised. You are the blood offering." Amina's voice rang through the forest. They heard it faintly from afar, screaming Sei's name. She had followed after all. But the spirit ignored her. Kola stepped forward, hands raised. "Take me instead. Let the boy live." The spirit did not respond. Adora moved beside Sei, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Is there no other way?" Sei turned to her, and for a moment. His voice was not his own, deeper, ancient. "There is a path," he said. "The vow must be renewed. Not with death. But with devotion." Kola fell to the ground, weeping. "Then we will rebuild. We will serve. We will remember." The spirit raised its bone hand. The rooster leapt from the altar and turned to ash midair. The calabash cracked open. The spiral stones pulsed once. And then the wind died. Silence fell. Then, the spirit spoke a final time. "Return with the first rains. Build the altar anew. And never forget again." The smoke vanished. Sei collapsed. Kola rushed to him, cradling his body. The boy was unconscious, but breathing, a faint, steady rhythm. Adoora looked to the sky. The first drops of rain had begun to fall. The rain that followed was unlike any Ndimu had seen in years. It began as a soft drizzle but soon turned into a cleansing downpour that soaked the earth and washed away the dust of grief. It fell not with violence, but with purpose, as if the sky had been holding its breath for a century and finally exhaled. They carried Sei home in silence, his small body still limp. His breathing shallow but steady. As they passed through the village gates, the elders who had once whispered of exile and misfortune stood in stunned silence. No one spoke. No one dared to ask what had happened. The storm had already told them, something had changed. That night, Sei woke with no memory of the spirit's visit. But his voice was calmer. And his eyes clearer. He said only, "The forest is quiet now, and nothing more." Mama Ruka came to the house that morning and blessed him with oil. Whispering into his ear words meant only for spirit-marked children. Then she turned to the family and gave them their next instruction: they must rebuild the shrine before the next full moon. Or all would be lost again. So began the work. It was not only labor of hands but of hearts. The Abadil family returned to the place of the old altar, not alone this time, but with villagers behind them. Word had spread of the encounter, though no one knew the full story. What they understood, without needing detail, was that the curse had lifted, and it had not been done by prayer alone, but by a reckoning. Kola led the rebuilding with reverence. The stones were reassembled by hand. And no machines were allowed. Every log used for the structure was chosen after offerings to the forest. Adoora oversaw the cleansing rituals. Calling upon old chants their ancestors had once used to purify sacred spaces. Even children helped. Carrying water from the river and weaving protective talismans of grass and beads to hang from the shrine's eaves. Sei, though small, held the central role. Each morning, he was taken to the site where he sat in meditation for hours, his hands resting on the new altar. Sometimes he hummed ancient tones no one had taught him. Other times he whispered to the wind, as if relaying messages to someone unseen. Mama Ruka told them not to interrupt, the spirit speaks through him now. Let the bond be restored. The community, once fractured, began to heal. Strange things began to happen, but this time, they were signs of favor, not doom. Goats gave birth to twins. Wells that had long run dry began to fill. And in the sky, birds began circling again, especially above the baobab tree, as if returning to a forgotten throne. But not everything was easily repaired. Some villagers still harbored doubts. They questioned why such a heavy price had been needed, why the spirit would curse an entire bloodline for a broken promise. Others feared that renewing the shrine would invite other spirits, not all of them benevolent. And deep inside, Kola struggled with guilt. Though the curse was lifted, he still bore the shame of silence, of allowing the vow to be forgotten for so long. One night, just days before the full moon, Kola went alone to the shrine. The moonlight bathed the structure in silver, and the forest around him was hushed. He knelt before the altar and spoke aloud. "I am old," he said. "I may not see many more seasons. But let my death mark a turning point, not an end, but a new beginning. We forgot you. But the forgetting ends now." He placed the final piece of his father's broken staff into the shrine's foundation. As he did, the wind stirred gently, and for the first time in decades, he felt peace. The final ritual was held beneath the full moon. The whole village came. Dressed in white and red, they danced and sang from dusk until midnight. A new priesthood was declared, not just from the Abadil line, but open to any child born under signs of ancestral calling. The old ways would no longer be hoarded by blood, but shared in spirit. And Sei, the spirit-marked child, was crowned the first voice of the altar, a living bridge between the Abadil vow and the community that now stood together in restored balance. When the drums stopped that night, and the last embers of the ceremonial fire faded into ash, the air was different. Lighter. Whole. Years passed, and with them came seasons of abundance. Of trials, and of renewal. But never again did the Abadil clan fall into the shadow of forgotten promises. The shrine endured, not as a monument of fear, but as a living symbol of restored harmony, between the living and the dead, the seen and unseen. Sei grew into a man unlike any the village had known. Quiet but luminous. His presence seemed to still storms and calm quarreling hearts. He spoke little of the day he entered the forest of vows, but his dreams remained touched by spirit. When a child fell sick and no cure could be found, Sei sat by their bed and whispered the names of ancestors, and the fever broke. When a dispute rose between clans, he called them together beneath the baobab and resolved their bitterness with words no one could remember after, only the peace they left behind. He had become more than a priest, he was the vow made flesh, the living proof that promises to the spirits were never meant to imprison, but to anchor a people to meaning. He taught that the spirit world was not a place of punishment, but of memory. The ancestors do not hunger for blood, he once told the young initiates. They hunger for truth, for us to walk in the echo of their footprints, without forgetting where those steps began. The shrine became a place of pilgrimage. People came from villages miles away, bringing stories of their own, curses that needed lifting, dreams that needed interpretation, ancestors that had gone silent. Sei welcomed them all, though he made no claim to be a miracle worker. I only listen, he said. The spirits speak. I carry their breath. As for the Abadil family, they too were transformed. Adaora became the village's foremost teacher of ritual knowledge, training the next generation of spiritual keepers. Amina opened her home to orphan children and trained many of them in the traditions they had lost. Even Kola, now white-haired and slower in step, was respected as the elder of reconciliation, a man who had failed, and then atoned, which made his wisdom richer than perfection ever could. One day, under the third full moon of a particularly fertile year, Kola passed away peacefully beneath the baobab tree. His eyes were open, but there was no fear in them, only a kind of deep recognition. As if he saw someone he had longed to meet standing just out of sight. Sei buried him with honors. At the edge of the spiral stones, he placed not just the ritual items, but also a folded note, written in his own hand, tucked into a carved gourd. No one knew what it said. But the wind blew gently through the trees that night, and the fireflies danced longer than usual. Like a silent benediction. Years turned into decades. Ndinu grew, not into a city, but into a stronghold of spiritual heritage. While other places lost their ancestral languages and practices, Ndinu preserved theirs, not out of fear, but out of love. Each child born was brought to the shrine within 7 days. Not all were called, but all were blessed. And still, stories were told, around fires, under stars. Stories of the curse, of the forgotten vow, of a boy who walked into the forest and came back with a spirit inside him. But above all, stories of redemption, that no matter how deeply a promise is buried, or how far a people may wander from their truth, the ancestors wait patiently, whispering through dream and misfortune until someone dares to listen again. On the centennial of the rebuilding of the shrine, Sei, now an old man, stood before the people of Ndinu. Children surrounded him, some wide-eyed, others restless. He smiled and raised his hand for quiet. Many years ago, he said, my family forgot. And the spirits remembered. We suffered. Not because we were hated, but because we were loved too fiercely to be allowed to drift. He looked out over the crowd, some descended from his blood, others not. But all bound by the vow now renewed. We rebuilt the altar, he said, but more importantly, we rebuilt the bridge, between us and those who came before. The baobab tree rustled behind him. And for just a moment, those watching swore they saw a figure in red, standing beneath its branches, nodding slowly, with eyes that burned like quiet stars. But when they blinked, it was gone. And the air was still.